Climate change mitigation is a key concern for an ever-growing number of companies around the world. They want to do their bit to meet the climate goal adopted by 195 countries back in 2015, keeping global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius. To make this happen, companies are increasingly turning to comprehensive climate action policies. RWE committed to the Paris Agreement early on and set its sights on being carbon neutral by 2040. But it doesn't stop there. The group has now also set itself what is termed a science-based target, SBT for short. In other words, a target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions that takes the latest climate science into account. But why the need for yet another target in the first place? Julia Brune and Jens Wiggershaus from RWE's Corporate Responsibility Team explain.
When it comes to climate action, we at RWE are already taking action. We are phasing out coal-fired power generation. We're expanding our renewables portfolio, and we're working towards building a hydrogen economy. We're taking these measures to help the energy transition become a success and to ensure that we become carbon neutral by 2040. We're taking these steps to comply with the Paris Agreement. So we wanted to make sure we leave no stone unturned. And the Science-Based Target Initiative is helping you to do that?
Correct. We are confident in our approach, but we wanted to take a closer look. And science-based targets let us just do that. Well-known independent organizations, such as the UN Global Compact and the WWF, are behind the eponymous initiative. The experts evaluate and certify corporate targets, thus ensuring they are in line with the Paris Agreement.
RWE has been measuring the carbon emissions of its power plants for many years now, but this isn't enough, so RWE is considering other factors. Why is it not enough to focus on power plants?
When it comes to carbon, naturally the first thing you always look at is the conventional power stations. But this is by no means the only place where our activities are the reason for greenhouse gas emissions. This is why we have chosen to look also at the upstream and downstream emissions along our entire value chain.
What emissions are these precisely?
Greenhouse gases can be divided into 3 groups: Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 covers our direct emissions, such as from generating electricity in our power plants, but also gases emitted by our vehicles, for example. Scope 2 refers to emissions from the consumption of energy purchased as electricity and heat. As an energy producer, RWE has almost no Scope 2 emissions, but all those purchasing electricity on the market do. Take aluminium production, for example. It's an energy-intensive process and relies on electricity bought by the company. Its Scope 2 emissions are therefore considerable. Scope 3 covers emissions that are produced along the supply chain. For example, so when RWE buys something, a new turbine, a vehicle or a rotor, Scope 3 greenhouse gases are emitted during the production of these goods. However, paying close attention to the carbon footprint of our suppliers allows us to decrease our emissions in this area as well. Since the most emissions are generated during the production of electricity itself, RWE mainly has Scope 1 emissions. In other sectors, the emissions focus more on their energy consumption and supply chain, that is Scope 2 and 3.
What exactly are the new targets that RWE wants to achieve?
First, we meticulously calculated all our emissions in 2019 for the new RWE. That year now serves as our point of reference. On this basis, RWE is committed to reducing emission intensity, that means emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity generated, from Scopes 1 and 2 by 50% by 2030. And we will have reduced our Scope 3 emissions by 30% by then.
And why do we need these new targets?
Looking at our power plants alone is not enough for us. Of course, electricity generation makes up the largest part of our portfolio. But now, for the first time ever, we are actually considering all greenhouse gases. Not only carbon, but also methane, for example. And we are including all direct and indirect emissions. This is another massive step forward.
So RWE is generally in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement?
That is precisely what the Science-Based Target Initiative has officially confirmed. Climate change mitigation is a guiding principle for the new RWE. And these science-based targets once again just prove that.
The EU has set ambitious targets in order to meet the objectives set out by the Paris Agreement. And RWE wants to be carbon neutral by 2040. Many factors will have to be taken into account to make this happen. What will RWE have to do to achieve the goals it has set itself by the deadlines mentioned?
We have taken various steps to make this happen. In terms of Scope 1 emissions, or in other words, direct emissions, we are continuing to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We have a clear roadmap for this. Then, as one of the leading companies worldwide, we are also continuing to drive the expansion of renewables. We are investing massively in wind power, solar farms and storage facilities. Today, 85% of our investments already meet green investment criteria. We are also focusing on green hydrogen. Its production is not only key for the decarbonization of the economy, it's also an option for operating our gas-fired power stations carbon neutrally from 2040 onwards.
And what about indirect emissions? That is, Scopes 2 and 3?
So when it comes to our Scope 2 emissions, for example, we're now paying closer attention to the carbon footprint of purchased energy. Scope 3, such as the value chain as a source of indirect emissions, requires special attention. Business travel, commuting, waste disposal, products chosen by procurement. This is not simply a matter for RWE alone, but also for our suppliers and partners with whom we are looking to collaborate closely in order to reduce emissions.
As we can see, the RWE Group emits greenhouse gases across various areas. Thanks to our science-based targets, we now have a comprehensive overview of all greenhouse gases so we can work on further reducing emissions. Also, together with our suppliers and partners, we are firmly committed to this goal. Our energy for a sustainable life.